This is the story of an 18th century voyage and a 21st century adventure. Our volunteer crew includes Royal Navy sailors, scientists, medics and historians. And we're sailing an exact replica of the Endeavour, a ship in which the great explorer and navigator, Captain James Cook, discovered the east coast of Australia in 1770. Also part of our crew, some of the people most affected by Cook's arrival in this part of the world: New Zealand Maori and Australian Aborigines. We are now some 200 miles into our voyage, following Cook's exact route, up the Great Barrier Reef and aiming eventually for Jakarta in Indonesia, a distance of over 3,500 miles. I am here as part of the crew, but also to record our adventure as our journey unfolds.
Listen, one of the things I'd like...
Last week, Shane, one of our New Zealand volunteers, fell sick. He grew steadily worse.
You'll take your blood pressure for us?
Claire, our doctor, suspected Shane had developed a life-threatening blood clot on the lung. She sought urgent advice.
My differential diagnosis was of either a pneumothorax or a PE. I wondered if you could give me your advice. Did you hear that information?
And this was all happening as we were taking the ship through a narrow coral channel, trying to break out of the treacherous Great Barrier Reef into the South Pacific.
Coming out of 215, true.
This was just as Cook had done over 200 years ago to avoid being shipwrecked on the jagged coral outcrops. We followed precisely in his wake.
Two, six.
Sure, so you'd go for PE rather than pneumothorax. OK, thanks very much for your help, I appreciate it.
No toggle on that.
OK, bye-bye. You must think I'm completely mad. We don't put in chest drain, it's the bottom line, which is good, that's reassuring, but he needs off.
Shane is clearly very ill. Somehow we have to get him to hospital, but we're many miles out to sea with the Great Barrier Reef between us and the mainland. Our next stop, Pajinka, at the very tip of Australia, is about 4 days away. Shane cannot wait that long. This is closer to being in the 18th century than is comfortable.
Feel really stoned.
Good.
In Cook's day, any illness or injury was dealt with on board by the doctor, Dr. Monkhouse. And it's true of that time that 1 in 3 sailors on long voyages were likely to perish at sea. From shipboard injuries, drowning, scurvy, dysentery, or venereal disease.
On the port side, away you go.
Shane is getting worse. Only the 21st century drug morphine is holding back the intense pain in his chest. But an SOS has been put out, and by good fortune picked up on Lizard Island, a diving resort back in the Great Barrier Reef. They've already sent out one of their boats.
Well, Shane's going off in the dive boat. They're going to take him to Lizard Island, and I think the flying doctors are planning to scramble out to collect him. They'll take him down to Cairns Base Hospital, and at Cairns Base they'll probably give him a chest x-ray and see what's going on with him.
Right away on the yardarm!
We all watch in dismay as Shane leaves the ship. Especially Mickey, who's become good mates with the affable Kiwi.
Well, that's my wingman gone now, isn't it? So I'm on my own now, sort of thing. He was good. We used to bounce off each other quite a lot. But he'll be back in Pajinka. I'm not at all worried about that. He's just strained a muscle or something like that. Pulled a muscle badly.
Mickey, always the optimist. But most of us realise Shane has more than a pulled muscle.
Find me up there!
Just before breakfast, we are called to muster. Chris, the captain, has news of Shane.
Shane is now in Cairns Hospital. Basically, what he has is a blood clot on his lung, probably caused by the flight out, and he will not be rejoining us. So, on your behalf, I'd like to thank Claire very much for getting all that, diagnosed it correctly, and all the rest of it. Well done, Claire. It was very good. Well, that was very good.
The feeling that he has thrombosis is, you could feel a kind of shiver run through the boat because we thought he'd done his neck in, but it's not this harrowing boat with all of its difficulties, all of its rigging and things that can hurt you, the strain that puts on your muscles and back, but it's this absurd cigar-shaped thing of tin flying through the air that's done it to him because he's a big man and there's not enough room to move on these flights. So in a way, our 18th century boat is a safer place to be.
Captain Cook certainly felt safer now that he was outside the Great Barrier Reef. He had saved his ship and his crew. But he was deeply troubled, torn between duty and prudence.
The world will hardly admit of an excuse for a man leaving a coast unexplored he has once discovered. If dangers are his excuse, he is then charged with timorousness and want of perseverance, and at once pronounced the unfittest man in the world to be employed as a discoverer. If, on the other hand, he boldly encounters all the dangers and obstacles, he is then charged with temerity and want of conduct.
Eventually, Cook made his decision to head straight back into the reef that had already so nearly sunk him. Out in the South Pacific, he could not do what he'd come to do: explore, chart, and discover new lands. But re-entering the reef was even more dangerous than Cook had anticipated.
The ship was carried surprisingly fast towards the roaring and vast foaming breakers. All the dangers we had escaped were little in comparison to being thrown upon this reef, where the ship must be dashed to pieces in a moment. The large waves of the vast ocean meeting with so sudden a resistance to make a most terrible surf, breaking mountains high. We were in the very jaws of destruction. Yet in this truly terrible situation, not one man ceased to do his utmost with as much calmness as if no danger had been near. Eventually, we came in by an opening which I have named Providential Channel.
Joseph Banks, the wealthy young botanist on board, though fearing the reef more than most, was actually delighted to be heading back towards the land. Like Cook, he could also do no useful work in the open sea.
We are happy once more to encounter those shoals, which but 2 days before we thought ourselves supremely happy to have escaped from. How little do men know what is for their real advantage.
Banks was ambitious and dedicated. He pushed himself and his botanical artist, Sidney Parkinson, hard. Parkinson was there to record in detail the new plants they were discovering for science and the glory of the Crown. Like Cook, we too re-enter the reef. Not where he did at Providential Channel. Even today that's thought far too dangerous a route, but slightly further south through a broader, safer gap. Now, just as Cook did, we are swapping the wind-blown ocean for the coral shallows and prospects of landfall. But our botanist Tom and our botanical artist Lucy are still working hard on the plants collected at our last stop on the coast. One of Tom's prize finds was Barringtonia racemosa. It lived for barely a day after picking.
Barringtonia racemosa.
The main problem in my life at the moment is time, and the fact that the plants that we collect deteriorate really, really quickly. So you have to get onto them very soon after they've been picked in order to get their colours. In fact, they started wilting very soon after we picked them, so you do rely quite a bit on your memory. Obviously, it's not the ideal way to do a botanical painting, but that's what it was like for them, and so that's what it's like for me. Everything's very ephemeral, so you have to work very quickly and go on what you've got.
This evening, we finished drawing the plants got in the last harbour, which had been kept fresh till this time by means of tin chests and wet cloths. In 14 days just, Mr. Parkinson has made 94 sketch drawings. So quick a hand has he acquired by use.
On the top, mate, so...
For Cook's crew, being back on the reef meant more work too, back-breaking work as they had to weave the ship between the deadly coral outcrops. They wouldn't have been best pleased at the prospect, but they would have been kept pliable by the daily consumption of either 1 gallon of beer, a pint of wine, or half a pint of rum. In the 21st century, modern safety regulations simply don't allow us that much alcohol.
Short of all kinds of known human stimulant, we are desperately sad and deprived men on this voyage. No drugs, no pick-you-ups, no put-me-downs, no sleeping pills, no alcohol, no caffeine. It really is a truly awe-inspiring spectacle to see so many people managing to endure in these conditions.
Everybody needs a boost.
You got 15 minutes to go for a swim, let's go. The pool is now open.
There's no sharks!
Yeah. Go on. Watch out.
But this is not something that would have happened on Cook's ship.
This is great in the 21st century, but in the 18th century, Cook's men couldn't swim, so they wouldn't have done this in this way. Sailors are very superstitious creatures, and from almost the beginning of recorded history, we know that sailors deliberately didn't swim. What they preferred, if the ship went down and they had no hope of surviving, it was best to drown quickly. So rather than thrash about pointlessly for half an hour, it's best to go down straight away. Rather fatalistic. No sense of hope for the future. Ship went down, it was all over, finished.
It's so much fun!
Caroline the cook has no time for swimming. She's preparing lunch. We're seeing what it's like to follow the same diet as Cook's men and have it cooked in the same way. Today, it's boiled salt beef and cabbage.
I'll pop the cabbage in at the very last second. So it's really, hot, but not even cooked, still crunchy.
And we have, as always, ship's biscuits. Coarse flour mixed with water, baked for hours and dried out for days.
The biscuits have been going down quite well. People have become quite attached to them. They're still very hard. People are working out all these different techniques to break them. Knocking them on the corner of the tables. There you go. They're a lot softer, well, they're not a lot softer, but they're sort of softer. They're easy to get in from the inside out, that's one. And just plain good old jaw power. I'm frightened of losing my teeth.
Now, on our ship, again because of 21st century regulations, the only smoking allowed is from the oven chimney. Tobacco, unlike on Cook's ship, is completely banned. Everywhere on the ship.
You want to work with me on this?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, you're going to have to help me.
Okay, now, take this.
He's obviously not thought it through, has he? I want to climb down. I'll never keep it dry that way. I have a cunning plan.
Okay, watch out below.
Cigarette and lighter and a soap dish. Sorry. Keeps it dry.
You guys are a bit smooth, really. Here we go, Free Willy! To the bitter end. Oh no, failed! That'll be the water then.
Hold on. Here, step on this.
Everyone down to lunch. Go, go, get. Hurry. You don't know what you're missing. Or maybe you do. Hurry.
People have had a huge culture shock with this diet. It's not what I would cook myself on normal voyages. It's not what people would choose to eat. I think a lot of people are missing the junk food, manufactured food, Coca-Cola, all that sort of, heaps of sugar people are missing, and chocolate and all that sort of stuff. All of which is great, but it's not essentially very healthy. So people are definitely getting a far healthier diet.
Healthier in some ways, but in other ways dangerous, as Mickey has found out.
Fighting them for that, just knocked me bridge egg. I just nibbled it to see if it was hard or soft. Next thing I know, my tooth shooting across the table.
The pieces are smaller, and that means that they get more of the salt out. Find it that little bit more palatable.
Listen, one more time. It's a hit with the ladies every time.
Sailing a tall ship is a 24-hour operation. Right now, we're having to furl the mainsails in case strong winds blow up during the night and carry us onto the reefs.
Whoa, this is swinging round, guys.
And you appear to have an inordinate...
Alex, an Australian historian, is now clinging to a yardarm 130 feet above a rolling ocean. Extreme history.
Well, I've always felt that it was a dangerous temptation for historians to get their history exclusively from books, and that it's important to try to get a sense of the landscapes that you write about, the settings for the events that interest you, and coming here to a place like this to think about history is an extraordinary experience. I mean, even though obviously what we go through is in some ways very different from what Cook and his men went through. The dangers we face are different, our expectations are different. Nonetheless, it's hard not to feel, in some sense, that you have a better understanding of the dynamics of their world. And in that sense, it's a very rich experience. It's certainly an extreme context in which to think about history.
Yes, it's better explain to my wife, who's probably watching this, what I'm doing in a dimly lit room. With a woman putting on rubber gloves.
It's your worst nightmare, and it's happening now. Right, let's have a look at the situation and see what I can see and see what I can't see.
Whilst Claire improvises some onboard dentistry, at the other end of the ship, Lucy is working into the night too. Those plants are still withering. And Tom is busy pressing plants, conserving the ones that Lucy has managed to draw.
My orchid is starting to wilt. The flowers are starting to drop off, so I figure I've got no time really but to attempt to draw at night, and so I'm seeing what I can manage to get done by candlelight, which is what Parkinson would have done.
I feel like I'm doing something quite different here. Nice and wide.
You got it in the eye.
Did I? Oh, I'm sorry, sweetness.
Alright.
This is not an ideal position to be working in. Ideally, you're sitting at a desk upright with an easel in front of you, a plant sitting in a lovely vase like this. I'm beginning to understand why Parkinson's drawings almost seem flat, but I think it's because he's doing what I do. He's drawing from very strange horizontal perspective. So you don't get the most natural three-dimensional effect. You just do what you can.
Do you want to very tentatively just touch it with your tongue and see if it feels in about the right place?
Yeah, it feels all right.
Does that feel okay?
Yeah.
I think that's it. Job done, you know.
Okay, girls?
Yep.
Right, how's the clue looking? How's the clue looking?
After a landmark, groundbreaking operation performed in the sick bay yesterday, and then bit on some cheese and I pulled it out and my tooth was stuck in it, so it wasn't a resounding success. I can't believe I've lost it again. It lasted 3 meals, and 2 of them were soup.
Don't you worry. We'll get some tar on it, and Phil and I will take a good whack at it with a sledgehammer. We'll get that tooth knocked right back into your head.
10 degrees port.
Don't worry about coiling them up. I need you to go to your lines for setting the thaw course.
What about the port lead?
We're some 400 miles into our voyage, progressing north up the east coast of Australia, and now just off Cape York in Queensland, approaching the northernmost limit of the continent. To the west, on our port side, rolling mountains shrouded in virgin rainforest, much as it would have looked to Captain Cook. And under our hull, the same coral reef that so bedeviled him, but which did not in the end stop him from charting and exploring this coastline, from doing his duty. Cook was on a mission, not only to explore and to discover, but to feed a newly developed appetite in Europe for the South Seas.
What happens is the Pacific captures European imagination in the late 18th century, and it's a great unknown, one of the last, as they saw it, great unknown areas, and everyone wanted to be involved if they could, every European power, to get a bit of the South Pacific. It engages the greatest artists of the day, it engages political theorists, philosophers, naturalists, all manner of people. It becomes a matter of popular culture. There are plays, there are paintings, there are pictures, not least of which, of course, are Cook's journals, which become one of the great publishing phenomenon of the late 18th century. Catherine the Great was reading about Cook at the same time as Casanova was reading about Cook, and at the same time as Marie Antoinette was reading about Cook.
Cook becomes a national hero, not just for this voyage, but later on into the 1770s, as the British Empire shows signs of collapsing. The British desperately need a hero figure. They need somebody to put up on a pedestal and say, this is the best kind of man we can produce in England. And he's the hero figure that carries the British through the American War and into the War of the French Revolution. And he's only ultimately eclipsed by the next great national hero figure, the truly transcendent figure of Nelson.
But there is increasing division on our ship about just what Cook's legacy to history is.
He achieved some pretty amazing things. I mean, some of the things that we've experienced since we've been on this boat, and coming through the reefs and stuff, just negotiating the reefs. I mean, I can see it just was a nightmare. But I don't see him as a hero, but I certainly don't. I certainly acknowledge what he achieved. His accomplishment.
But the story is about Cook. But what about the people that were affected, and what about the amount of massacres that went on?
Even after Cook.
After Cook. And how the Aboriginal people were affected, and the Maori people.
Bruce had hoisted the Aboriginal flag on the first day of our voyage.
It's a moving symbol. I mean,
for many of the Aboriginal people of this country, Cook is associated with a subsequent white invasion and Aboriginal dispossession, loss of their land, loss of their resources. Cook's too easily been assimilated to a kind of white myth, but the story is also a story of colonialism, of dispossession of Indigenous peoples, and it's very important that we don't elide that.
En route to the north, we come across one of the many deserted tropical islands in the Great Barrier Reef. Often Cook would have come ashore at such places to forage for food and fresh water. We decide to do the same. Supper tonight will be around a campfire on the beach, and because we're off the ship, we're going to break open the bear rations. We're rowing ashore in the pinnace, the longboat. Well, that's the idea.
You right there, Andrew?
Yeah, it'd have been better if we hadn't bothered to launch the pinnace and mess about with a boat that's never going to get anywhere to the beach. It's an idea that really wasn't worth trying. You see, we grounded way out there. This beach is very shallow and there's a lot of coral bombs here which come right up close to the surface.
Yeah.
But it's still good to be here. Beautiful spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, stunning.
Deserted island?
Our own deserted island, yeah. We can run the flag up and claim that. No, we can't. That belongs to somebody else. See you in a bit.
This is way too much work for a cold beer.
Oh, I'll sell my starboard testicle for a beer in a moment.
What have you got, Ruth?
Oysters.
Hey.
Oh, beautiful. Beats any food you get on that ship. Compare that to a cookie.
You have half on it.
I ask you.
No time for chat, beer.
You're waiting a while, eh?
No chat, beer.
We're standing in front of the beer.
There you go.
We are.
Yeah. Ready, take a pause.
What's wrong with this picture? Absolutely nothing whatsoever.
All alone, Bruce?
To be honest, I was just in deep thoughts about the boat behind me and the sunset, and I was thinking on how the people would have felt when they saw this boat, the original ship. Just thinking about what I've learnt and how I'm gonna adapt and my future and the people of Cape York and our future. I'm not too worried about myself, but I am worried about the next generation and how they will adapt and hopefully have the right frame of mind that the majority of Aboriginal people in Cape York have, and that's to move on, but at the same time practice the cultures that we've learned over generations. I've got my spear. I've got a heap of white people. Should I repeat history that's happened here?
It's the first time on camera.
Yeah. No, they're a nice bunch of people as well. And they truly understand what we're about now and what has really happened.
Oh, if you can. Oh! Jace!
and I will raise you from your sleep.
So they just like
I will kiss you in 4 places as I go running along your street. I will squeeze life out of you. You will make me laugh and make me cry.
Hey! 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 Hey!
This morning, we have just a short hop to Pajinka at the very northern tip of Australia. Our last stop before we head out on a 4-week voyage following Cook across the open sea to Indonesia. But it is here, at Pajinka, that some of us will be leaving the ship for good. For our Aboriginal crew, this is home, and they have families waiting for them.
It is sad to leave the ship, because I've made a lot of friends too here. And I was just thinking there earlier of how I'll miss them. I'll miss them quite a lot, because we've become more than friends, working together, sleeping together and anything else. Yeah, it is sad, but it's nice to come home. It's nice to come back here and meet up with family and friends again. It's mixed feelings.
It's mixed feelings too for one of our history professors, Ian.
Come to a decision, haven't you?
Yeah, very, very hard decision, and a sad one really, in a way. I've decided to leave the voyage at this point. I'm sad about it. I'm feeling quite sort of distressed at leaving before the voyage is completed. It's been much harder than I anticipated, or perhaps what I should say is that I forgot what a 54-year-old body is like, trying to be an able seaman. I have a bad back, and I'm finding myself really quite helpless. One of the lessons I've learned as a historian is, my God, these guys lived a hard life, and it's no wonder that very few of the seamen were over 30 years old, because I think they just destroyed their bodies. I leave regretfully, but with a feeling that something's been accomplished and that the rest of the leg is well in hand. They're very good historians on board, and I'm sure in that sense I won't be needed.
Our goat Wilhelmina also has to leave the ship. Modern quarantine regulations, something Cook didn't have to worry about, means she must not leave the country. She's going back to her farm, and we're losing our only source of fresh milk.
Okay, hurry it up now, guys, nice and quick. This is like bungee jumping for goats.
Lower the goat.
Okay, nice and smartly on your yard tackle.
The children of Pajinka come out to greet our arrival with a traditional song of welcome.
Just me and my goat.
Spontaneously, Mariao and Curtis, New Zealand Maori, whose ancestors were also confronted by Cook, respond to our Aboriginal hosts.
Karangamai, karangamai, karangamai kia mātou. Pūsai iwi Māori, karangamai, karangamai. O te tongi o te mātui, te tongi o te mātui. O ka runga ke au ki te tongi o te mātui. Tui, 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 tui a. Tui ai runga, tui ai raro. Tui ai roto, tui ai waho. Tui ai te here tangata, ka runga te pō, ka runga te a. Tui ai te muku tangata I tai kia mai, hauai ki nui, hauai ki rai, hauai ki pāmama. Ki te whaia, ki te omara mati he, mauri ora! O Oh, Jarite! Jarite! Damo! Ringa pakia! Kamate, kamate, kora!
The natives of this country are of a middle stature, slender-limbed, their skin the colour of wood soot or of a dark chocolate. I do not look on them as a warlike people. On the contrary, I think them a timorous and inoffensive race, no way inclinable to cruelty. But the natives of New Zealand are a warlike people. Strong, well-made, active, rather above the common size. We had frequent skirmishes with them. Our firearms gave us the superiority. At first, some of them were killed, but we at last learned how to manage them without taking away their lives.
The haka, wow, really, that's the first time I've seen it up close and personal. So yeah, it was really good, really a spectacle. It's like a meeting of two nations for the first time sort of thing. We really went for it. Fantastic. It was really, I was humbled by it to be able to witness it. I was really, I was overwhelmed.
As the dancing continues on the beach, the historians and navigators climb to the top of a nearby island. This was the very island that Cook climbed on the 21st of August, 1770. He needed a high point in order to see what lay before him to the north. This would determine the route he would now have to take in order to return home. Did the land carry on and link up to New Guinea, as many maps in circulation at the time suggested? Or did it give way to sea, as some suspected? It was sea. Cook realised that he had at last reached the tip of this continent and that it was not joined to New Guinea.
What he saw here was what was not there. I mean, people had proposed there was something there, and he said, well, there isn't. That's why he said, I claim the merit of clearing up a doubtful point.
I always understood, before I had sight of these maps, that it was unknown whether or not New Holland and New Guinea was not one continuous land. However, we have now put this matter wholly out of dispute. But I claim no other merit than the clearing up of a doubtful point.
It is rather extraordinary to stand here in Cook's footsteps, isn't it? I mean, I know we've been doing this for a couple of weeks, and we've been on the boat and on the ship, and we've been on shore and discussed some of these things and looked at some of these things. But nevertheless, to stand here and think, well, after this, you really know that Australia has come to an end. If you're Captain Cook, and you can actually get home that way rather than having to go all the way back that way. It's it must be quite a moment.
More importantly, though, as this was now clearly the northernmost limit of land, Cook knew this was his last chance to claim possession for the Crown, as the Admiralty had instructed him to. Together with an entourage of officers, scientists and marines, Cook prepared to plant the British flag on what he was to name Possession Island. But the Royal Society, a body of eminent scientists in London who had jointly organised and financed this entire expedition with the Royal Navy, had already given Cook guidelines about claiming land for the Crown.
The natives are the natural and, in the strictest sense of the word, the legal possessors of the regions they inhabit. No European nation has a right to occupy any part of their country or settle among them without their voluntary consent. Conquest over such people can give no just title to the land because they could never be the aggressors.
But Joseph Banks argued that since the Aborigines appeared to have no formal relationship with the land, no consent for possession needed to be sought.
The natives are not very numerous. They live in small parties along the sea coast. They seem to move about from place to place like wild beasts in search of food through hunting and fishing. For we never saw 1 inch of cultivated land in the whole country.
It's now very clear that actually Aboriginal people did cultivate the land in various ways, in particular through the use of fire, which totally changed the face of Australia, also selective culling of animals. And it's over the last 20 or 30 years become increasingly clear that Aboriginal people acted very carefully and very consciously as custodians of the land in ways which were simply invisible to Europeans when they first arrived.
I am confident that this coast of New Holland was never seen or visited by any Europeans before us. So I hoisted English colours and in the name of His Majesty George III took possession of the whole eastern coast. The natives here may appear to some to be the most wretched people on earth, but in reality they are far more happier than we Europeans. Being wholly unacquainted not only with the superfluous but the necessary conveniences so much sought after in Europe, they are happy in not knowing the use of them. They covet not magnificent houses, household stuff, etc. They sleep as sound in a small hovel, or even in the open, as the king in his palace on a bed of down.
It gives me a very strange sensation being here. And this is the spot on which my ancestors essentially took possession of this continent. And it's the events which culminated in what happened here, which made possible the building of modern Australia and, you know, the building of what is in many, though not all respects, a very fine country. But that country's been built on a primal and enduring wrong. And so to be here and to have, I guess, what's really the dilemma of modern Australia crystallised in this way is quite moving. It feels strange.
We say goodbye to the people of Pajinka, but we're also bidding a farewell to Australia itself. From here, Cook sailed west towards the Indian Ocean, and we'll be following him out into the open sea for an epic 4-week passage to Indonesia. But as we prepare to leave, we have another casualty in sickbay. Andrew, one of our professors, has had a mild fever for a couple of days, but now his condition has suddenly deteriorated.
Hold away forward. 2, 6, heave. 2, 6, heave. 2, 6, heave. Hold forward.
He's been coughing, feeling a bit hot and sweaty. Last night he had quite a high fever and had some rigors, which is shakes, and he started coughing up horrible coloured spit. Sort of looking at him clinically, he's really quite unwell with it. He's got pneumonia, so we're going to hit it hard in the first instance with some intravenous antibiotics, which gets to the root of the problem quickly. The aim is to turn him round and then be able to wean him off onto tablets.
2, 6, heave. 2, 6, heave. 2, 6. Hold away forward. Go. Okay, stand by on the yard arms to ease. I need all hands to the stay tackles.
You feeling icky?
Yeah, I need to go on speed.
Have we got a bucket somewhere?
Andrew has collapsed. We have another emergency on our hands.
I've just spoken to the captain. He's asked for an air sea rescue, so we're going to put Andrew into the rubber duck.
So I need to stabilise him tonight and get him ready for the helicopter at first light tomorrow.
I'm very sorry to get off the ship. It's been a tremendous time. Just couldn't breathe last night. I was so short of oxygen, I just couldn't wake up. So I just needed some good professional care and dose of tablets, a few drips, and I'm away.
Well, it seems like we're down to 3 historians. They're rapidly becoming their own subject matter. History. They're running out, falling over one after each other. I don't know what on earth's going on down there, unless there's some conspiracy and all knocking each other off to be the last historian left on the Endeavour.
Andrew is picked up by the Flying Doctor Service on another deserted island. And as we prepare to set sail, he is whisked back to the 21st century. We are now down to just 3 historians, and little realizing that our adventure is only just beginning.